Okay. Yeah. We'll go off of Jackson clock time here. Yeah.
Not sure why the setup is different now, but the report option is right here.
That happened last time.
Oh, okay, so maybe it's like an updated version.
Mhm.
So then that, and then we'll just make sure to share the screen.
Yep. Sunnyvale?
Yeah. Before, it looked like it was in front of the CrossFit. Did the representatives want to be, did Chris and John want to be acknowledged, or?
I'll do a brief introduction if you want to, and if you want to call to order, and then we'll skip it over to introductions. Yeah, for a special meeting, but yeah, we don't have to have a formal agenda or anything else like that, but that would be.
So just gavel it in, give it a
Yeah. I think we can go ahead and get started.
There we go.
There it is. 3-year-old clock.
Yeah. Not bad. It's on 1760s, I think. Everything live? Everything live?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to call this meeting to order. This is a special meeting to listen to the results of the air quality meeting that New Garden Township commissioned with Westchester University. Thank you guys for coming. I believe there was a bit of an accident on 41, so I think people are just going to keep trickling in, but we're going to go ahead and start the meeting now because we have a lot of stuff to get through. So again, thank you for coming. I'm going to turn it over to Chris, our township manager. Sir? Yeah, we'll just do the rise for the Pledge of Allegiance real fast. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And good evening, everyone. I'm Chris Himes. I'm the township manager. I'll be doing kind of a quick summary of the timeline for tonight, as well as brief introductions before we start initially with the presentation by our two speakers. So excuse me, presentations by our two speakers for tonight, which is the reason all of you are here. So just to kind of get everybody on the same page, this is a separate township commission study that was basically entered into an agreement in the summer of 2022. I believe it was between the township and Westchester University, where we partnered with Dr. Lorenzo Chena and his team at the Department of Public Health, or Public Sciences, I want to say. He'll be much better at explaining his position and title than I am. So that was a study that has been ongoing since probably commissioned in the winter timeframe, officially started doing measurements. And of course, tonight's preliminary report component of it is essentially a dive into some of the results of that study, as well as the finalization of the report that'll be delivered at a later date upon completion of the actual scope of work and the proposal for that. So if you are unfamiliar with this entire, I'll call it dialogue to date, earlier this year in March of 2024, there was a commissioned, I call it a letter health consultation report. There was a summary understanding of the DEP commission study that was performed at an earlier date. So it can get kind of confusing when you're talking about which studies were whose and when they were done and where those reports and analysis are. So if you are interested in looking backwards at the PADEP study for the Department of Health as well, that letter health consultation report has been up since March when it was provided to the township on our website, as well as the actual link to that public meeting. Everything was recorded, all 2.5 hours of it. So if you're interested in looking back at what that dialogue was, this meeting as well will also be recorded. And of course, when the reports are finalized, everything will be provided on the township website as well. So without further ado, after we get through Dr. Chaina's presentation, and we have Rachel Roberts from American Mushroom here as well, to provide some summary understandings of their initiatives, as well as continuation efforts as well. We'll have a Q&A, so roughly about 45 minutes of presentation before we open it up for questions and answers. So I just ask that everybody just, give our speakers tonight just, the benefit of just civility and patience before we get to the Q&A portion, and all of your answers will be addressed to the best of their abilities, as well as the township if you have anything for us as well. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Dr. Chaina. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. I think I'm going to try and turn a couple of lights off to see if we can see the screen a little better. And then maybe, I think if I move away from the speaker, there's less echo. And I'll borrow the clicker. All right, so while I wait for that to come up, I'm the director of the Environmental Health Sciences program at Westchester University in the Department of Public Health Sciences. And so I appreciate you being here. I appreciate the township also putting together this setting so that we can talk about the results of this pilot study. I listed here some of the graduate students that have been involved in this project, and we had an incredible amount of data to work with. And so I'm really appreciative for their efforts in doing this. Daniel, Matthew, Jess, and Victor. And I know that a couple of them are actually texting me that they've been stuck in that accident and they're going to be running late. So they'll be coming in probably in a few minutes. So it's a pilot study. We call it a pilot study because the scope of a pilot study is to really start seeing if there is a problem that needs to be addressed in a larger scale study. And it also helps us see what kind of instruments are necessary, if the instruments that we choose are sufficient for the measurements that we want to take. And so fine tune before we really decide if we want to go into a larger type of study. So starting from the background and a little bit of the origin of this project, it starts from the fact that the mushroom industry has been growing a lot in the recent years. In fact, half of the fresh mushroom grown in the US come from Southeast Pennsylvania. And there's been concerns from residents about the odors, maybe even corrosion of metal that is outdoor and electrical equipment, concerns about the health effects that these gases may have. So the scope was to conduct some ambient air sampling starting in New Garden Township. So what are some of why are there health concerns? Well, so the compost that the mushrooms grow on is a mixture of manure, straw, grain byproducts, calcium disulfate. And when organic matter decays, it creates gases that are associated with health concerns. And the three gases that come from this type of decay are hydrogen sulfide, and then methane and ammonia. So particularly of the three, hydrogen sulfide exposure is the one that is of the largest concern. At low concentrations, between 0 and 10 parts per million, is when we start smelling the strong odor of rotten eggs, then it can cause irritation of the eyes and the respiratory system. At higher concentration, between 10 and 50 parts PM, we start having a little more severe concerns with dizziness, nausea, headaches. And then when we get above 50 parts per million, the complications become very severe. Now, besides the respiratory irritation, we have convulsion, coma. A big problem is that it paralyzes our sense of smell. So you stop smelling it at high concentration. You think, oh, I must be in the clear right now, when in fact it's actually the opposite. And now you're in danger of actually a coma and immediate death. But those are very high concentrations, right, that we're talking about for these dangers. So of course, there's different levels of concentration that people can be exposed to. So because of these dangers, there are regulations that have been established. And I made this slide to differentiate what are occupational regulations and what are regulations for the general public. So in a work environment, the regulations are set up, there are recommendations that come from the CDC. And specifically, the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, have a department called NIOSH, the National Institute of Occupational Health and Safety. And their recommendation is that exposures should not exceed 10 parts per million after, over 10 minutes. So no more than 10 parts per million for 10 minutes at a time. OSHA, which is part of the Department of Labor, has an exposure limit of 20 parts per million in an occupational setting. Now, in an occupational setting, we have, I would say, if I have to put a range of the age of people in an occupational setting, I would say probably between 16 and 65 years old. And generally are healthier people. And the reason I say that is because if you're a person that has some underlying health condition and you maybe have some lung disease already, and you're in a work environment where you just cannot handle that, you're just gonna quit and leave that job and go somewhere else. So in the workplace, people tend to be stronger and healthier, I guess, the ones that stay there. So the regulations are a lot higher than they are for the general public. The general public includes newborns, infants, people with health conditions, elderly people, right? So a much broader variety of people that could be more susceptible to exposure. Therefore, the exposures established for the general public are a lot lower. In fact, the PA, Department of Environmental Protection, has a standard that says the concentrations released over 1 hour should not exceed 0.1 parts per million. So that's 100 times lower than the NIOSH standard, right, for the general public. And also, you should not exceed more than 0.05 parts per million over 24 hours. Right, so you can quickly reach that 0.0, that's about 1 hour and 15 at 0.1. It's the equivalent of the 0.05 over 24 hours. So the first thing that we did is we started looking at, has anyone else done any work or any research on this topic? And so we found that in 1995, there was a study by Cobb and colleagues that responded to health concerns and complaints from local residents. And so what they did is that they surveyed 75 people, and which really in the world of surveys is an extremely small sample size. And they couldn't link any of their symptoms with their exposures. And then they took samples for 1 day. And you living here, you're probably thinking, yeah, that could have been a really good day. It could have really a really bad day, right? So a 1 day sample is probably not very representative of anything. And really, they concluded that there were no concerns. We found another study on the Latino employees in the mushroom industry, but that really only looked at building designs, carbon dioxide, moisture, temperature, airflow. They didn't really investigate gas exposures. And then the latest data that there was is that DEP and Department of Health data that was recorded in 2022, where they found the highest concentration at 0.2 parts per million, but in general, not exceeding their standards. So now our objectives were to see, are there elevated concentrations of toxic gases? How do they vary over time? How do they compare to studies that others, the data that is available? And so the goal was to try and quantify the general public exposure to methane, hydrogen sulfide, ammonia, gases released near mushroom farm production facilities for a whole year. So we could look at differences in seasons, different months of the year, and in multiple locations. All right, so how did we do it? So we took this instrument called the G7 EXO. It's an area monitor. So it's an instrument that is rugged and is designed to stay outside, withstand the weather. And we had 3 of these, and we put them within about 100 to 600 feet from composting sites. And we sample for those 3 gases. That's the chemical formula of ammonia, methane, and hydrogen sulfide. These instruments report readings every 10 seconds. So you can see how you can get millions of data lines really quickly. And we went from February 2023 to February 2024. We calibrated instruments. None of the instruments were more than 3 months without calibration, and that's the recommendation for the manufacturer. That's our weather station, and below it, you actually see one of those instruments, one of those area monitors with its multiple sensors in the front. These are the locations where we placed them. So I'm going to call them locations A, B, and C here in New Garden Township. And I'll start talking about the results also in that order. Again, I mentioned that it's a pilot study, right? So there is the reason why we had 3 instruments, because we wanted to get an idea of how does the wind direction change, you know, how do the readings change whether based on where we place them and the distance from the sources and the location where they put them. So we tried to kind of like surround areas where we thought we could capture, get a pretty good capture of where the emissions were coming from. All right, so here are our results. We found that of concern of the 3 gases that we measured was really only hydrogen sulfide. We found that our readings exceeded the DEP regulation on ambient air quality, which poses a concern for the general public and for sensitive populations. The levels did not exceed any of the occupational regulations. But again, you know, we talked about the difference in an occupational setting, you're dealing with mostly indoor concentrations where there's no air movement. Outdoor, you're dealing with heavy dilution and movement of the wind. So we couldn't really compare our data to an occupational setting because we were not taking measurements in the occupational setting. We were taking them where the residents live, right? The patterns were fairly irregular, as you'll see from the data. We found that ammonia and methane, our instruments were really not recording any of these readings, meaning that all the readings were below the limit of detection of our instruments. So essentially, we were getting zeros all the time for those other 2 gases. It doesn't mean that they're not there, they're just at very low concentrations that our instruments were not even seeing them. So location A, the first location, what are some of the readings? We're gonna start with showing you, what I have here is for the whole year. This one is showing, because there's so much data and it's complicated to just plot so much data and actually get anything out of it, we try to find ways to make it easier to visualize it. So what we plotted here are the peaks, all the maximum readings that we recorded throughout the year. And the pattern that we noticed here is that the highest concentrations were in late November and December. So late fall, early winter is when we got the biggest spikes. And they went up to as high as 6.5 parts per million. So you remember that we said the DEP said 0.1 is really where you start having, you should be concerned. You should be exposed to more than 0.1 for an hour. So we had spikes all the way up to 6.5 parts per million. Now let's look into some examples of some of, I'm showing you some months for each season. So in May, this is the daily maximums in May. So the highest in May was about 4 parts per million that we recorded. And again, so these are the peaks. Then the next one, these are the daily averages that were recorded in May. So this is an example of some of the spring readings. Then I have some summer readings. So in July, for example, we went up to close to 4.5 parts per million in some of our spikes. You can see there are some days where, readings were very low. Some days where readings were higher. Hence, again, doing a one-day study really is not very meaningful because you could have just caught a good day or a bad day. This is in the fall. So you can see how late November, we started seeing that little increase in concentration. And then in the winter, in December, is when we saw the highest concentration at that 6.5 parts per million. And one thing to point out is that the 6.5 is getting really close to that where the health effects started to being a little more severe, right? It's very close to the 10 parts per million when I have more severe health effects than I have at lower concentrations. All right, location B. Location B taught us that the location is very important. That where you place your instrument, if it's in, where the wind is not blowing, you're not going to capture much. We started location B really at the police station. And we kept it there for about 6 months, and we were getting hardly anything. The month that we put it there, we got like a little reading and then nothing until June. And at that point, we thought, we're probably in a spot where the air is just not coming here. We could still smell, the smells are still present, but keep in mind that because it's a pilot study, our instruments have limitations. They only will start recording at about 0.5 parts per million. So the fact that we see 0 doesn't necessarily mean that there's no concentration there. It's just that our instrument can't see it, right? It's just like, if you are looking at a microscope and you have to go higher with the magnification to actually see something, right? The magnification of our instrument could only get there. What does that mean in terms of interpreting this data? It means that this is actually the best case scenario. The scenario could actually be a little worse if we have an instrument with a higher resolution, because we're really only getting readings. So the zeros are not necessarily 0. They could be 0.4. So our instrument is averaging and calculating from 0.5 and higher. So it really is confirming that, these concentrations are there. But again, as I was saying, what we learned from this is that location is important. So then we moved it to the location that I showed you in the map in June, which was closer and in a different direction of the wind. And then we started seeing readings that were recorded in those months after June. There are months, again, so like in spring, in May, we weren't picking up anything from the instrument until we moved it. And then, in July, we moved in July, we started getting more readings. Same for looking in the fall and then looking in the winter. Location C taught us that instruments can go bad and have faults and just start having readings that look erratic, and sometimes they need validation. So for this, we started, you have to realize that the scale now is being blown up. So for the first half of the year, we were getting, the normal spikes, and then all of a sudden in August, we started seeing readings close to 100 parts per million, which is at the point where you should see people collapsing and having coma, which wasn't really happening, right? Did any of you collapse on the ground around August to December, or family members? No, right? So we started thinking that probably this instrument just went crazy, the sensor just went out of whack. If in a case of a larger study, when you have more than 3 instruments, when this happens, what you do, you put a second instrument next to it, and you see, if I see both of them at the same pattern, then I'm thinking, all right, there's a problem. But if only one is doing this, and we're thinking this data probably we should disregard it for the rest of the year. But in those months where things were going well, similar patterns where we're seeing, so in the spring, readings well above 0.1 parts per million, in the summer, and then until like all of a sudden now we start seeing these readings near the highest range that the instrument can actually read, which was 100 parts per million. All right, so now we want to look at, so the DEP says that the exposures, they give us regulations based on 1 hour of exposure, right? I should say, you shouldn't be exposed to higher than this concentration for more than an hour. So I'm going to show you some examples when we have like a whole hour at those higher exposures. So for example, July 7th shows us in location A, how the concentration started at 0.5 and they were up to 1.6 for the whole hour. And the red line that you see right there is that DEP standard of 0.1 parts per million. So it's not just the spikes. It's not like up and then immediately to 0, but it stays sustained at those higher concentrations for the whole hour. Here an example of December 10th. Again, you see that even though it goes down to 0 a couple of times, then most of the time, the majority of the time is above that 0.1. And so on average, you get well above 0.1 parts per million. Location B, similar patterns. In July, we had, we could see there's a whole hour and 15, about an hour and a half. December 5th, similar pattern. And location C is, earlier in the year, we trusted data. Then later on, I didn't even put that graph there because at that point, we decided that the instrument was just not worth keeping that data. Let's see about what patterns did we see in the data. So this one shows us which day of the week we had the highest peaks in reading. So Mondays and Thursdays are the days where we had the most peaks of concentrations. Even though every day of the week, we could find peaks, the most recurring ones were on Monday and Thursdays. And then in terms of time of the day, 42% of those peaks in concentrations happen between midnight and 8 a.m. And then 32% between 4 p.m. and midnight, and about 26% between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. This actually goes along, I remember from the presentation for the DEP, they had a similar pattern where they found that the fall was where the concentrations were a little higher, and also early in the morning, the peaks were higher. So we saw a pattern very, very similar to that. All right, I don't know if the clicker maybe is a little out of range or out of battery. Is it just? Okay, all right. Metal corrosion. Now, this one is more of qualitative, not quantitative data. What does that mean? I did not quantify the corrosion. I don't measure corrosion. What I'm reporting here is what I've observed on my instruments. So I put a brand new weather station out there with, from the factory with brand new bolts and a brand new copper rod for grounding it on the ground, on the ground. So that rod was bright red copper with that wire, bright red copper, and those bolts were brand new. And I have noticed that within a year, it almost looks like those bolts melted on my equipment, and the rod is covered in this black powder. So I did more reading and more research on metal corrosion and found that the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, has documentation on when equipment is exposed to hydrogen sulfide, especially in sewer lines, it corrodes faster because hydrogen sulfide mixes with oxygen and moisture in the air and turns into sulfuric acid. And then it creates this black powder and the black coating. So then I remember, well, at home, actually, I know I have a rod just like that was installed 8 years ago. So I went and took a picture of that. So, and it looks more like green, which is what you would expect copper to look like when it is exposed to the air, right? It turns kind of the greenish color on top of it. But the black powder is more of the like acidic attack, the corrosion that occurs on copper or on other metals. And so just in concert, you can see how this black powder, I think, is more typical of that sulfuric acid from the, it goes along with our measurements. We did find higher readings of hydrogen sulfide, so it makes sense that there could be more metal corrosion. Again, this is observational and not quantified. So to summarize, our data does indicate that our elevated concerns for hydrogen sulfide above the Department of Environmental Protection Regulation. In fact, our measurement went as high as 33 times above the DEP. And that's excluding the location C that went out of whack, okay? So that would have been like thousands of times higher. So without that, so just from locations A and B, we get up to 33 times higher the DEP findings. So this is a good indication that we need to collaborate and to try to associate these exposures with point sources and tasks in mushroom or soil production to try to determine where is it coming from. So the future of the study would require a collaboration between researchers, the American Mushroom Institute, farm operators, and local government to now not just take these measurements from outside, but maybe go a little closer to the action, right? So what we did, we have applied to one of those PA, Department of Agriculture grants. And we presented in the application our findings of this pilot study. And we told them we have reason to believe that we should do a larger scale study now, more instruments in more locations and closer to the action. So again, this requires collaboration with farmers and soil producers. So we're funding for a 2-year project. They will focus exclusively on hydrogen sulfide. The other two gases, we found that it's just not worth, investigating any further. So the goal will be to install 10 of these devices, and also to get higher sensitivity for the sensors. Now we'd like to get sensors that are more expensive, but they go as low as 0.1 parts per million as a limit of detection. And we want to associate the operating procedures with the gas releases and concentration patterns. And this would help us to contribute to revising the best practices for environmental protection in the mushroom farm community, which is a document that is maintained by the Department of Environmental Protection. Finally, one thing I wanted to show is why we think that our data is so different than the DEP data. We were a lot closer and also at lower levels of taking our measurements. Hydrogen sulfide tends to settle lower, closer to the ground. The DEP at one location only, and was further away. I think it was about, Daniel, was it about 600 to 1,000 feet away from our closest location? And also the elevation was at least 100 feet higher, because I think it's really close to this building. It's like, which is on a hill. So, we saw that with our instruments, that based on where we had them, we were getting different readings. So multiple locations is really needed, because capturing outside concentrations is very tricky. You're not in a confined environment. The wind changes direction, it blows, it dilutes. And some days, you probably know, some days it smells worse than others. And the nose is just not a good instrument at all, right? I could be smelling it at a super low concentration where it's actually not even dangerous yet, especially if you have had people come into the area that have never been here. They probably will tell you, wow, it smells awful today. And you're like, well, today is actually a good day. I don't smell anything, right? So you know that your nose is just not a good instrument. It depends on how long you've been exposed to it. Your sense of smell gets adjusted. Some people pick it up at lower level than others. And even we saw that at a really high concentration, we stop smelling it because it paralyzes the nerves of the sense of smell. So anyways, that's essentially the whole presentation of a summary of our findings and of our data. And I guess we'll do questions afterwards, right? Yes. Okay, all right.
Yep. To the right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rachel Roberts. I'm the president of American Mushroom Institute. We're a national trade association for commercial mushroom growers. As you know, most of our members are here in Pennsylvania. First, I want to set the scene a little bit for our involvement. In 2021, we got a call at AMI that, from some of our members saying, there's concern about hydrogen sulfide levels, there's air quality concerns, and the residents are, wanting to speak with the industry. So a smaller group of us, I want to say there were maybe about 15 people around the table, sat down, and I learned, I've been in this for going on 8 years now, but I learned about the concerns at that time, and we learned about a previous study in 1999 that had been done, but wanted to collaborate from the beginning. And at that time, the question was, should there be another study to be done to learn more about the growth in the industry and how the growth of the industry has impacted everyone? And we all said yes. So fast forward, I'm not going to tell you anything you don't already know. We're here to react and respond to some of this good information that we're getting. We have DEP's information. We're learning about this in real time with you tonight about what this actual data is. And we want to be businesses that are sustainable, are good neighbors. And we know to do that, that we have to address these concerns and to respond to the recommendations that we get based on the information. So that's our baseline. We want to know what it is and what to do. So our look at things is a little different. We want to look right away at mitigation. What do we do? So this is just what I'm going to talk about real quick. So we got a grant, as did Dr. Sina, from the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture, and have engaged with a private environmental services firm. I'm just not throwing names up here tonight because I didn't ask permission to do that, but they're a well-known firm in the area that specializes in BMPs, so best management practices with lots of different farms, from Amish to mushrooms to dairy. They have a lot of experience, and they have credibility and relationships with farms where they can be upfront, they can present data, and they can offer good recommendations on what to do where there are some concerns. So the person we're working with has plenty of experience, used to work with the Conservation District in Chester County, and knows his way around a mushroom farm and around the compost wharves in particular. We also have a Penn State technical advisor who's going to be helping out with us, who has a longer history of this issue, both with mushroom farms, but also having consulted with other types of ag specialists to understand some air quality concerns. And he's going to be helping us out on the project too. We'd like to invite Dr. Sina to collaborate, with us on the project and to give us a look. We don't want to waste anybody's time. We want to have people looking at this and helping us understand what we're looking at as soon as possible. So in our project, first of all, the majority of the money that we're going to be getting really actually goes to the air quality monitors. So that was interesting for us. They are very expensive. We're going to be leasing several of them and putting them on a pilot farm. So this is a typical mushroom farm in southeastern Pennsylvania in Chester County, whose setup mimics a lot of what you all already live around. It's a little smaller, so it's going to be easier to capture the information. We'll be looking at baseline data. The project goes for 9 months total. The monitors actually just got set up yesterday. The 9 months will give us a full look at the season. So starting now all the way through the end of spring. That's what we're prepared to look at as of today. And we want to identify the primary source of the emissions on the farm. In the mushroom industry and in dairy and in other industries, there's concern about the lagoons, right? So that's what we want to look at. We want to confirm that our concern about the lagoons is the right concern. And then we want to experiment with a mitigation practice. So if wastewater tanks, as we call them, lagoons, are covered with, there are products out there. They look like tarps, they're carbon activated, and they can mitigate hydrogen sulfide. That is a layperson's explanation of how it works. I'm not familiar with the technical details of the science of how they work, but it's something that's out there in the marketplace that's currently being implemented on other types of farms. And the belief of the folks we're working with is that this could be something that the mushroom industry can respond with and can address the concern of the lagoons. So on this smaller farm where we're doing the pilot, there are going to be 6 what are called multi-ray gas monitors. I don't know exactly what that means, but I know that these are monitors that we're leasing and that continually capture data, and that data gets fed back on a continual basis. So there's going to be a weather station. It's going to be collected bi-monthly, plotted, analyzed. And then once we get enough of the baseline data, we'll then go ahead and install the geomembrane cover with the activated carbon filters, and we'll be looking at what, if anything, changed and if it changed enough. That's it. It's going to be simple. We're working on a solution. This is one of the things that we want to try. We want to try it right away. Like I said, the monitors went in yesterday, and what we're doing to our best ability at this time is to react and to respond to the information that we're getting. So based on the information from DEP, we hear hydrogen sulfide. We have a good guess as to where the levels are high or highest on the farm. And so we want to introduce a mitigation measure for that and see if it works. And, you know, we're hoping the results will be results that you all are also make you feel comfortable with, and all of us as a community. Like I said, these guys want to sustain their businesses. They want to be good neighbors, and we want to be in it for the long run with everybody. That's our plan for now.
All right, now while I quickly get this set up for public comments, I think it probably just makes sense to have an orderly line of just, I think we did the similar format last March. So I'll have Dr. Chaina and Rachel come up here, just kind of sitting side by side. Think of it like a fireside chat kind of thing. So just ask questions as they come to mind. Of course, they said they'll do their best to their ability to answer the questions in a timely manner here. So if you do have a question, please come up and queue, and it'll just be a line queuing function if you have that as well. And I just encourage you to, because it is being recorded, just name, address, and just your question as well for the public record. Thank you. And I don't know if we want to just pass it back and forth.
Hello, everybody. My name is Ajit Kang. I live in Hartfeld community, and I worked at DuPont, retired there several years, chemical engineering, little bit know about this stuff you're talking. My questions are fundamental. One is what do you recommend as residents? We do keep our doors shut, don't walk outside. Also, where you show the locations, what radius are we worried about? Within 100 yards, a mile away from the mushroom facility? Are we concerned? Or by the time dilution has gone enough so that I don't worry about it? And I did not hear any timing. Are we talking 2 years? Or we are talking 10 years? Or is the data keep going? Okay, guys, you just move here or die. It will happen automatically. And I know all these studies have a lot of financial issues, concerns. And what is the focus? And who's looking into that effort? Do we people need to go to Harrisburg, do some kind of, what do you call that, there, push them hard or other kind of stuff? And I lived here 85 to 88 at Gerald Farm, and we used to hear a lot of mushroom smell. I came back again, 2000, lived in Middletown. And this time we came, I never thought about mushroom. Anyway, I'm 77. I may be another 10 years by the time your study may continue. Okay, answer my questions. What we as individuals residents should be doing. I know mushroom guys will do something, don't know when. But as we individuals, some recommendation based on your understanding analysis, what we should be doing. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Well, yeah, thanks for the question. So they're obviously complicated issues, and there's not really an easy answer, right? If any of you were here when the DEP had their presentation, the recommendation probably made some of you laugh a little bit. Like, so the recommendation was, well, you should stay inside or leave the area. And you're thinking, well, heck, I live here. I bought my house here. I want to live here, and I would like to enjoy it. So how can that be a recommendation to stay inside, leave the area? I thought about it, and I thought, well, what else could they recommend, though? I mean, if it smells really bad and you can't stand it, then yeah, probably the best thing would be to just go inside and keep the doors closed. I really don't have an answer for you. And I mean, I'm probably also not the person that should be solving that problem, because my job is a researcher, right? And I'm not trying, to tell you you shouldn't ask me this question. I'm just saying that it's a legitimate question that I think you should have, right? I'm just not the qualified person to answer. I can tell you this is, there are legitimate health effects associated with hydrogen sulfide. Now, not everybody will experience those. Some people are more sensitive to that and to asthma attacks, for example, that could occur. So in that case, yeah, then probably trying to decrease the concentration as much as possible would be recommended. In terms of the time, our study, the full-scale study is a 2-year study. So that would allow us to do a whole another 1 year worth of sampling, but with more instruments and with the hope of collaborating with the farmers to be a lot closer to the action and to try to now associate peaks with tasks. And then the second year would allow us to now analyze all the data and summarize it. As you can imagine, it took us a while with 3 instruments. With 10 instruments, it's going to be, you know, even a larger effort. So it just takes time for these things to really, because the issue, you know, with data is the fact that you want to make sure that your data is solid, scientific, right? And, you know, you mentioned that you have a background in engineering, so I'm sure you understand this. You know, a lot of times people would ask me, oh, can you tell me, you know, the scoop, right? What are your instruments reading? And I'd be like, you know, I can give you a little bit of information, but, you know, I haven't looked at the whole picture, and it could be the instrument that is faulty. And then when I start looking at it, I realize that, you know, I don't trust this data. So it takes time to really get to trust your data, to analyze it properly, and then to be confident that what you're presenting is as close as possible to the truth, right? That's what we're really trying to find out. What's the truth? And we're relying on instruments to tell us the truth because it's not really built into our body. We have to use an instrument. So it would take a little bit of time. And so our hope is that in 2 years to have an even bigger picture of really what the situation is and then how it can be addressed.
In a conversation today, I was assured that Russell Redding, the Department of Agriculture Secretary, will be meeting with the Secretary of Health and of Environmental Protection to review, you know, what's been brought to the table today and to respond to that. For the mushroom industry, our study looks to be about a year to 18 months, depending on the data. But as soon as we have something that works, we will be knocking on the doors in Harrisburg and at the federal level to say, we found something that works. We need your help making this a reality. The feasibility of the tarps, the numbers look good, but they would be something that needed to be replaced every year. So A, if they work, B, we will be banging on doors and asking for funding to help us subsidize and help these things become a best management practice. And you know, C, that would be a long-term project where that would have to be something that were built into the budget year in, year out. But you know, the short answer is as soon as possible, as soon as we know for sure things can work.
Just to continue the dialogue, I want to be conscientious of other people's questions. We can circle back to it as well if you have another one afterwards, because it might get asked by someone else, but thank you.
My name is Susan Rollheiser. I live in Landenberg Hunt. I'm an original owner. My question is for Ms. Roberts. You said you placed your devices on a mushroom farm. Is it an actual farm?
Yes, it's a farm that also does their own composting. So it has a compost wharf, a lagoon, and is a farm.
How did you determine your upwind and downwind?
I can't answer those questions, but our environmental scientist who's doing it, you know, has all of that. And that's, you know, you can look at the public information. The grant itself is not under any type of non-disclosure. It's public. So you can look at that from PDA, and I can answer those questions for you offline. I just don't know the technical answer to that.
Well,
But
wind
there will be
shift,
about-
so that's
Totally aware of that. I mean, we're looking at from all the angles and with the experts that are, you know, going to pick everything apart.
okay.
We don't
And
want
as
to waste
far as-
anybody's time.
As far as size of this particular mushroom farm and their ability to compost, what are we comparing apples to apples? 5,000 to 100,000? Where do they fall in between?
They're a larger farm, so they're not, they're what we call a larger farm. And the proportions are the way the monitors are going to be set up, or actually got set up today. So my understanding, again, not being the technical expert, is that the proportionality will give us the data that will help inform us as to whether it's a smaller lagoon or a larger lagoon, or a smaller wharf or a larger wharf. Does this work? Do the numbers that we establish at baseline get mitigated with this solution that, has been working in other agricultural sectors?
My name is Dan Furlano. I live across the way here on Gardens Development. So I have multiple questions about the study. So I guess the first question would be, is it open for people to look at and be able to view, not only what's happening, but the results? The second part of my question is really around, I've been here 20 years. I never knew what a mushroom farm was before I moved in, and then I learned. I'm surrounded by them. What I've found is that there's various sizes. There's some of the large farms that are run fairly well, and there's some smaller ones that are run very poorly. So I don't know if what you're talking about would impact, especially when you talk about lagoons, impact some of the smaller mushroom farms, and would you be able to implement those solutions, or do they have a different problem? I don't know. But the mushroom farms, the smell is one issue. There's flies, that's another issue. There's excessive noise all night. That's the third issue. One of the problems I have is that there's no communication. There's no one to talk to. So I have your name now. So that, but I think a lot of this stuff can be resolved through communication, at least understanding what's going on. It's great to see your presentation. I thought it was great to see action. But I think we're kind of all feeling like this is a repeat, right? 20 years of kind of listening to this, but nothing really happening. So I think the more you can communicate with everyone, the better off everyone will be. Yeah.
My name is Ron Lupo, and I live at Landenberg Hunt, which is right behind here. We live in the lowland, and we have the worst of it all because of the mushroom composting facilities behind us. Now, you're talking about a carbon filtered tarp. How about what we worry about is the clay lined lagoons. We have well water. There is, I guess you could say, leach into those. It could leach out of the clay because it's pervious. They're not cement lined, right? From what I understand, those are not cement lined. They are clay, and eventually clay can give out. So there's a problem going down as well as going up. So you're going to cure one problem with the air, but we still have to worry about the other problem down below. We have to depend on that water for our wells. And the other thing is, we've expended a lot of money in that neighborhood. There's not probably one person in that neighborhood hasn't replaced a heat pump or an air conditioner more than, probably less than 5 times within 15, 20 years. I myself, 4. I've been there 24 years. The life expectancy should be about 14 to 15 years. That's why I should only have basically be on my second. If you go throughout that neighborhood, we have suffered gravely because of this. And when the DEV put their study in, which was right next door here, which is probably 50 feet elevation above what we suffered, everybody knew it wasn't going to work. The results weren't going to be the same as his, and they weren't. But yet, we want to continue with study after study after study. All it really takes is the state to finally get a grasp on this. This is a chemical going into the air. If it was a factory or an industry, they would be restricted to putting it in the air. That's why I often say, these aren't mushroom farms. This is a mushroom industry because of the way the soil is made to grow mushrooms. Aggregates are going in there, not of natural or nature. They are gypsum. All we had to do is enact a law that they have to live by the same standards that industries do. I don't think it's fair to industries to have to go through all what they go through because you term agriculture and give a free rein. That's wrong. And it's very wrong. I have no questions. Mine are all statements, but this woman that was just up here, this came off of her house. That's her electrical box, which could have caused a fire. This is our transformers in our neighborhood. This is a satellite in our neighborhood. I can go on and on. I've got pictures of all of them. We're still gonna sit here with another 9-month, 10-month recommendation. It's wrong. It's time to put our foot down and do it now. He gave us a pretty good study there. Why are you gonna continue? I have no idea. Thank you.
Hi, Kim Steimling. I also live in Landenberg Hunt. And Rachel, my first question is for you. What drove your decision to install the monitors yesterday, a day ahead of this meeting?
I just learned that they were installed yesterday, so it's not my decision. And we got the grant and we got the equipment, and our intention was to do things as soon as possible. So it was a coincidence.
Okay, okay. And then how have you had a chance, both of you, to talk of how you'll collaborate together yet? Has that been a discussion of how you'll do that?
Yeah, Dr. Sina met with myself and some of the composters and growers over a month ago. And we just spoke recently about what that collaboration can look like, so.
Does that mean collaboration of data of what you're able to gather from the farms here versus the farm that you're looking at? Because looking at the parts per million or what you're doing and how it relates to our specific area. I understand you're using a sample of a different farm, but we're here all because of how it's affecting us in this specific community. I have no idea where your sample is within Chester County and how it relates. So I understand you have to do it on a smaller scale, but I'm not seeing the correlation and how it's going to help our specific community, locations A, B, C, how that data is going to correlate.
So it's basically experimental, right? So the reason things are done on a smaller scale are simply it's more feasible and you can capture the data, right? So if it's going to work on a smaller scale, then you end up scaling up what you've learned. So it's a learning process at this point, and we wanted to do what we could do as soon as we could and in an environment that was very much like the larger scale that we're aware of. So that's the decision on that is you have to do something that's able to be done and able to be done more quickly. Things that are larger scale then become disruptive. They become not feasible because now you're trying to engage with actual industry operations at a level that you might not be able to capture the data that you want to capture. So the smaller scale is actually going to be more helpful in us learning more quickly what needs to be done to solve the issue. And in terms of collaboration, in the collaboration that we do on a lot of different research, it's about sharing the information. So our intention is to share what we're learning, get insights, get feedback, get recommendations and guidance, not just from our advisor from Penn State University, but in terms of what we're sharing with Dr. Sina.
Yeah, and I can comment on that too. So, at Westchester, what we can do is, provide more data and more information, but, at the same time, we're keeping our studies completely separate, right? So what we realized with our data is that, there is a problem that should be addressed, but the only way now to really find where the source of the problem is to have the farmers allow us to go on their property because it's private property. So we have to be able to go in and now try and see what is the source or what is the task that is causing these spikes. And then at that point, once we find it, can we isolate it? Can we control it? Can we change and modify the process so that the concentration can be kept low? So AMI, what they can provide is that they were able to, Rachel was able to gather a bunch of the farmers around a table and then have them meet with me. And I went and told them, look, as we're analyzing the data, we're finding out that, we think there's a problem. If you want to be a good neighbor and you would allow us to come in and take samples, what we can do is provide you independent data that you can also compare to your own data and can help you validate what you're looking at. And at the same time, we keep it separate because, we're our own separate entity. We have our own funding. We have no vested interest on one side or the other. My interest is to find out the truth, right? What are these instruments showing? And that's why we went and sought our own funding through the Department of Agriculture, because that would kind of keep us independent that way. So the collaboration can work really well. And then, with their instruments and with our instruments can just give us even more information. And that's really what you want. More data is always better than less data.
Thank you.
My name is Bill Hardy. I'm from Twin Bridges of Landenberg, which is technically Franklin Township, but I'm right on the line. So my question is really about the industry study. If you successfully demonstrate that the geotextile and activated carbon works, I want to make sure I understood your answer. For that to be implemented, is it going to be purely voluntary by industry association members, or does this actually require an act of Congress to make environmental legislation be applicable to agricultural processes and then funding from the government to pay for the textiles? Because if that's the case, it's probably going to be a real long time before anyone sees a solution. Or is there a high probability that the industry would do this voluntarily?
There's a very high probability that the industry will do this voluntarily. They're very concerned about this concern and they want to learn what they can do, ideally to make it go away, but at the minimum, to make the community livable for everybody.
But am I correct that today the industry emissions are considered agricultural source and therefore not regulated?
They're regulated occupationally, as Dr. Sina said, with OSHA. So those are done,
But not for
inspection.
nearby residents.
Right. And so, we are learning with you all as this unfolds. We haven't been asked a lot of these questions before. We haven't been, asked whether or not we have a solution to a problem, and it hasn't been presented before as a scientific problem.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is Christina Wildrick, and I live in Brittingham, which is right off of Bucktoe Road. So it just, honestly, it just seems disingenuous for someone from the mushroom industry to say, we're really concerned about this, as though you had no idea that there was this terrible smell. I've been here for 19 years, and I came here and I'm like, oh my God, like way after I bought my house, I smelled it, because I'm lucky enough that I don't have the smell very often, but it seems very disingenuous to say that the mushroom industry is really concerned about it when everybody who lives here and the people who work in the industry, there's not a possibility that they didn't know that this was a huge problem. The other question that I have is, you're talking about grants for these covers, these carbon covers. And I'm just wondering, why isn't that something that the mushroom industry, as part of their business, wouldn't just buy themselves? Why are the taxpayers having to fund your industry?
So the smells have been an issue as long as mushroom farms have been around, but what we know scientifically is that those smells don't always correlate to high levels of anything that is posing what's called a human health risk. So, in the way that agriculture is regulated, it's human health risk and environmental health risk. So yes, smells, definitely dealing with residential complaints about smells and other things for decades. So absolutely, that is not news. What we're learning about with you all in real time is the hydrogen sulfide, because the last time a study was done was in 1999. And at that time, that study didn't require that anything in how the mushroom farms operated change. So now we have new studies, we have new information, and we're concerned, like you all, about what that means for how we operate and how we need to possibly change operations to do that. The reason I'm talking about finding the funding is not because the farms won't necessarily do it themselves, but it's because as a trade association, that's what we do. That's my job, is to make sure that it is feasible and that it does get done, and that where resources are needed, if there's a solution that we can apply, people will have them. Because as an earlier person mentioned, there are really small farms, there are larger farms. There are lots of different margins associated with all the different farms. Some of them compost for themselves, some of them don't. So that's me talking about how we would assure that it gets done, but that doesn't mean that if this is a good solution, that they won't go ahead and just do it themselves as they have throughout the years. I mean, you know, it's not apparent unless it's not, you know, available information, but most of the compost wharves that have been built with, you know, DCNR's approval. Most of the best management practices that are, you know, inspected year in, year out are done because the farms want to adhere to them. So, you know, that's why I said it that way. We are very concerned. It's not that we have been unaware that residents, you know, are bringing these issues to us, but this is new information about the, you know, the health concerns.
Hi, my name is Donna Carroll. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for the study. It seemed to be much more thorough and informational than the one that we listened to in March. I live in Landenberg Hunt. I've been here 33 years. I've loved it here. I was willing to put up with odors when we moved here, knowing that it was part of living in Landenberg, but I'm concerned about health issues. And now that it's been determined scientifically that the hydrogen sulfide levels are too high to be healthy, I would like to ask, can we pull in the Department of Health and get some data on what health issues people might be experiencing, especially in Landenberg Hunt? I've been followed for the last 3 or 4 years because of lung nodules, and nobody can kind of figure out why I have them. And some of them go away and then I get new ones. And, you know, it's affected my quality of life. And I would just like to know what other kinds of things people were experiencing. And I'd like it to be taken to the level of some kind of study. So I'd like to ask if that's possible. And I know that, you know, I believe that the township, you know, paid to some extent for this study. So I'm assuming perhaps we could, you know, as a community, decide to take that forward. The other question I had is, the study has focused primarily or solely on the air quality outside of our homes, but I'm also concerned about the air quality inside my home. Is there a way to have any meters that could be placed inside the home? All of us in Landenberg kind of experienced damage to things inside our home that are metals, jewelry, stainless steel, chrome. And also, I mean, we've had the odors, which I think we're willing to live with if it's not a health hazard, but I'm concerned that it may be. So I would like to see that be part of the study as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So, yeah, so that would be a totally, you know, the next level of a study, right? Now we're trying to associate health effects with, you know, with the exposures. I mean, I agree with you that, you know, New Garden Township has been very proactive. You know, I want to recognize, you know, Don Morgan it was the first person that actually contacted me and put me in contact with New Garden Township. They've been proactive. They've been putting forward money to pay for the instruments and to do an independent study. which was probably overdue from what you've seen, to go to the next level and to see what about the health effects, right? So now this involves also epidemiologists, which are experts on the association between exposures and health effects, and would involve comparing communities. So what would that mean? That you start looking at health records and the number of reported lung diseases or people that go to the doctor with complaints for respiratory complaints, tracking those, for the past 10, 20 years, and then finding a similar community in Pennsylvania of about the same size without the mushroom farms and see, do we have similar data or, or more or not, right? As you can imagine, again, this is like a big effort. It's a multi-year study that Mhm. Mhm.
Time's not on our side.
Yeah.
In my study, it is not on our side.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, I think you should be upset. Probably would be upset too. If I had children that had asthma attacks and they were, more susceptible, I probably would think about maybe I need to move somewhere else because they cannot, if I'm worried about things like that, I would consider those things. I agree with you. Again, unfortunately, those studies are very expensive and take a long time because they require a lot of resources to just come to, conclusions. It probably will be something the Department of Environmental Protection of Department of Health would have to get involved in and decide, we want to now address this and use the tax dollars to do a study like this. At Westchester, we have the expertise, but at the same time, we're also teaching and doing many other things. And so I can't just go and pull professors and say, hey, can you just spend the next 3 years of your time doing this study? It will require resources to do that. You asked about, can I have a monitor inside my house? Yeah, I guess there are portable monitors. They do exist. They're not cheap. They're probably about $1,500 to $3,000. I'm not sure if I would want to have one in my house. Because then what would I do with the information? I guess I know that today is a bad day. All right, and what do? I don't know. I guess I'm not quite sure I would be willing just to put that much money into buy the monitor, put it inside my house, and then not really know what to do with that information, because what is there to do, right? But what I would suggest that if you think that there are some days where the odors are really bad and maybe you feel like maybe they could be bad for your lungs, there are respirators that can be put on to help to filter that out. They're just not your regular COVID masks or anything like that, because those are for dust and for particles. So to block a gas, it needs to have like a cartridge on the side that is designed for hydrogen sulfide. So that is another solution, right? To say I could purchase one of those, get the right cartridges, put it on when I think that it's really bad. Right. Right, yeah, definitely. Right. No, yeah, definitely is possible.
I'm gonna take this off because I'm too short to reach it. My name's Emily Carroll. Majority of you guys know me. My parents live in 19 Pelham, right over there. I actually had to move out. I had to move to Delaware because the stink was too much. I had a bunch of health concerns. I actually had a lot of health issues because of this issue. And I'm 35, so this has been going on for 35 years. My parents have lived there for 34 years. So I'm just wondering what y'all doing. And you are a president and you didn't bring any of your scientists with you? That's unacceptable. That's unacceptable to me. And you just started the thing yesterday? No, no ma'am, no ma'am. I love that you're from Westchester. I work at Agilent Technologies. We're a biomedical company. Hook us up. We'll hook you up. You know, this is unacceptable. My parents are probably going to die. Majority of these people are a lot older than me. So what are you trying to tell me? I can't bring my kids to my own parents' house. I can't bring my brother can't bring his kids to my parents' house because of the smell. No, thank you. We're not staying inside. Figure that out.
Thank you, Chris. Richard Gaw, Chester County Press. I have a few questions for Dr. Chaina. But first of all, I just need to verify the facts here regarding your study. Could you provide additional clarification, Dr. Chaina, about the hydrogen sulfide levels at that one location? It's that recorded levels of 100 parts per million. Is that accurate? I was just trying to make sure that it was accurate.
Yeah, so that's what the instrument reported. But like I mentioned during the presentation, it's just started doing that halfway through the year. So what we suspect there is just that the sensor just went out of whack. So that's why we kind of took that data as.
So that it could realistically be way over 100 parts per million. Correct?
It could,
Those-
but
those
I would have
numbers.
expected probably all instruments to just kind of have similar readings. It just seems odd that only the one all of a sudden halfway through the year starts spiking up and then constantly reading so high when it wasn't earlier, right?
But you trust the monitors that is in fact accurate, correct?
So not that monitor anymore, right? So that's why I say if I had the resources of 10 instruments at the time, I would have pulled another one next to it to confirm it, right? But because it's a pilot study, we were limited on our resources. We only had 3 instruments and I wanted to keep them in one in each location. I have to just deal with the data that I have. And so in my opinion, that instrument became faulty. In the next level, when we have 10 instruments, we will be able to verify if that occurs again, and then we'll know better. But then at that point, I would put a second instrument next to it to validate that data.
But you also said at the conclusion of your presentation that there are levels that exceed to the point of 33% higher than
Right, and that
related
is
numbers?
taking that instrument out of the equation. So
Okay.
it's just only looking at, say, locations A and B, we went as high as 33 times above the DEP. If we were to add that location that was 100, we would have been, much higher than that.
Okay. And your estimation is 33% higher parts per million numbers. Does it pose a significant health risk in humans?
So at this point, we're approaching the 10 parts per million where we are starting to see more significant health effects. We're starting to see more of the headaches, the irritation, the dizziness. While at lower levels, you complain more about the, it's just the odor is really strong and maybe, it's stinging my nostrils. When you approach the 10 parts per million, as you get closer to that, then you start having a little worse health effects, right?
You and I had an informal interview at your office earlier this year. I believe it was in February or March. And at that meeting in your office, you said that this issue could potentially be a serious health concern for area residents. Do you still feel that way?
Yeah, I do still feel that way because our data is showing that we are getting, significant concentrations. Again, it's difficult to say any respiratory disease that I'm experiencing right now is caused by the hydrogen sulfide, because you can go to any community in Pennsylvania and you will find people that will say, I have nodules in my lungs, my children have asthma, and multiple people have these. So it really will require an epidemiological study where you're trying to compare the two communities and you're trying to get a large sample, not just 75 people, and you look at also doctors' records. And then at that point, you can make a conclusion to say, Well, what is different with these two communities? Well, one is mushroom industry, one doesn't. One has a higher level of hydrogen sulfide, the other one doesn't. So now we can put one and one together and associate these health effects or these higher ratios of these health effects with the hydrogen sulfide exposure. At this point, all we can do is that, all I can tell you is that this is what my instruments have recorded. We're approaching, the level where there is a bigger concern, and we're a lot higher than what the DEP recommends. So to me, it's an indication that we need to start digging deeper and then start lowering those exposures significantly.
One last question for you, Dr. Chaina. Piggybacking on the comments and sentiments expressed by a lot of people here tonight at March's meeting and in conversations I've had with residents, specifically the residents of Landenberg Hunt community. Is capping the ultimate answer that's going to remove us from the worlds of study after study after study and finally get this solved? Internal composting, if you will, that was mentioned as a potential answer to this issue.
You said it's capping?
Capping.
Like capping the emissions?
Yes.
In a sense?
Yeah.
In my opinion, it's too early to know because my measurements come from outside of the farms where residents live. And I've not been able to know what was happening and what was causing that emission, right? So I don't know. At this point, I don't know. My hope is that in 2 years, we'll know more because we will have been able to collaborate with the farmers, now go inside their property and actually record the tasks that are occurring throughout the day, and then match those with the spikes in concentrations, and also put multiple samplers in multiple locations, and then really try to see if it's coming from a lagoon, then what can we do to solve the problem, and as a recommendation to solve the problem with the lagoon. If it's coming with a specific task, can the task be modified? Maybe change the type of aerobic versus anaerobic decomposition. Is adding aeration and oxygen solving the problem and really helping, as people have suggested? So it really needs to go to the next level where we actually can go closer to the action and see what is happening.
Great, thank you. And I have one more question. That is for Ms. Roberts. Ms. Roberts, are you at liberty to disclose the name of the farm where this 9-month project will be undertaken and where it is located?
I'm not, but it is located in Chester County.
So you're not even at liberty to disclose if it's in Landenberg or Avondale or Tuff Kenneman?
It's in Chester County. That's all I'm able to share.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Dr. Wayne Geller. I'm a retired physician and a resident of New Garden Township the last 24 years. If you don't mind, I'll take that down. And I have some comments as well as questions. In regard to the results that Dr. Chino presented this evening, Dr. Chino, I'm not an epidemiologist, but I totally agree that an epidemiological study is needed to determine the health consequences of elevated hydrogen sulfide levels. However, it's not a unique issue to the mushroom industry, and I'm not part of any other industry to speak of. I'm a healthcare professional. But apparently, from what I briefly read this evening, in fact, the petroleum industry struggles with hydrogen sulfide toxicity. And I think the key question that I have is in regard to the chronic exposure, because the data, and I could be wrong, I don't know the source of the data that you presented, and I have no reason to doubt its accuracy, but I suspect it's probably acute and subacute exposure versus chronic. Would you agree with that?
Well, again, you always have to separate a little bit of the occupational exposure versus the public exposure, right? So the acute, subacute, you're talking about these peaks and getting like high exposure just for a brief amount of time versus constantly being exposure to a lower level. There are different health effects associated with both. Some, some of these, peaks of exposure can cause some, symptoms, some acute or some brief symptoms, where other ones may cause diseases that develop over time. Hydrogen sulfide is a problem of the petroleum industry, of the waste management, sewage water, water treatment, dairy, really everywhere there is organic matter decomposition, there is going to be hydrogen sulfide. Even my septic tanks in my backyard, if I keep them open and I put my instrument closely or I stick my nose in it, I'd be exposed to really high levels of hydrogen sulfide, and I want to keep them capped. Well, yeah, it's not a new thing, and it's not only associated with this industry.
And I think one of the key take-home messages, if not the key take-home message from your presentation, was the fact that these levels were noted at least 2 different monitoring sites in New Garden Township. It concerns me just the fact that we now know that hydrogen sulfide levels are elevated, even though the smell is distinguishable from other gases, and the fact that mushrooms produce and the mushroom industry produces hydrogen sulfide, I don't think comes as a surprise to anybody in this room or living in this area. Nevertheless, where I'm going with this is that you have detected a signal, what I would call a signal. And a signal needs to be validated, needs to be, we need to find out the effects of that signal, meaning where are the levels elevated? Are they just around the mushroom houses, or are they throughout the township? And there's probably data from these other industries that produce excess quantities of hydrogen sulfide to determine what kind of health monitoring or epidemiological direction people should be going. So I guess, I'm looking at everybody in this room and I'm saying to myself, you got residents, you got people from industry, you got people from academia. Who sort of ties this all together? I'm looking now at the township officials in the back, and I'm saying, okay, I think we've all sort of, our heads are sort of looking in the same direction, which is we got a potential health concern here. So how do we get this taken to the next level as far as working up this signal? Because that's what we got.
Yeah, no, I think you have great township officials that have started this. They're bringing us together in this room. I can tell you that is not happening in all the other townships around. We've approached some of the other townships, and some of them said we're not interested. So this is great. This is, what you're saying is right. I wish there was a quick fix. I wish I could tell you, let's start tomorrow this epidemiological study. But my resources are limited, and things need to just move slowly. I think they're moving in the right direction. We're finding more. We're finding there is a bigger problem than what others have reported. And now we're gonna let's get this ball rolling and get it moving in the right direction. The best thing I can tell you is, be patient. I totally agree with you that you're right to be angry and upset and concerned. And so, the ball is rolling now. Let's keep it moving. Let's not stop it. Let's just keep going and see where it takes us. And then at some point, it really is going to get down to who's in charge of making laws and regulations, and who is in charge of the Department of Agriculture, for example, the Department of Environmental Protection, because they ultimately should be responsible for these type of studies, for funding them and for finding out, because they represent the public, right?
And that's one of the things we learned too, is that there aren't a lot of air quality experts out there who know what to do for this situation. We were really surprised. We had Penn State reaching out to their colleagues in Iowa, reaching out to colleagues in Georgia, reaching out to lots of different, folks who are used to dealing with dairy lagoons, for example. We reached out to private consultants to ask for, their advice on where to go with this, up in the northern part of the state with US Steel. They've dealt with it. So as we, looked across the spectrum of who knows what the H to do about this, like how can we make sure that if the answer's already out there, how do we get it, right? That was a surprise for us as well. There aren't a lot of people. There's not a Rolodex of folks who know what to do and can tell you what to do right away. And as we've learned with other products that the industry has used and has to be evaluated by different scientific methods, there aren't a lot of people who can solve the issue or who have already done it or can tell you exactly how to apply certain solutions to your sector. So that was something that we also learned. Everything has to be looked at, everything has to be validated, everything has to, make sure that there aren't assumptions happening for one community that aren't for a reason that, may involve other factors. So we too, as an industry, would like to know, what's already been done and how do we do it. There are too many questions that have to be answered first in order for these things to be, adopted as mitigation measures. So,
Thank you. I can't emphasize enough the importance of having a health epidemiologist evaluate the situation, because you can tell me everything you want as far as who you've consulted with. The short of it is you need a health epidemiologist involved. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Carol Hall, and I live across the way in Brittany Hills, the over 55 community. Am I correct in understanding that in your study, Dr. Sina, that you are going to be placing these monitors, 10 or I can't remember the exact number, in various places with the permission of the growers, right? And my concern is, how willing do you think these people are to allow you to come in and do your research on something that potentially could get them in a situation where they may not want to mitigate or spend the money or do whatever to help the situation? Because they're, I assume, are very comfortable now in what they're doing, because when we talked, and I was at the March meeting, they're not under any regulatory body that is governing them or telling them what specifically they can or cannot do. I know you have this farm, and have they given you permission so that you're going to be able to do everything you want on this particular property? But Dr. Sena doesn't. He's going to go, and you said it's dependent on them allowing you to go there. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is correct, right? And so part of it is, developing this relationship of trust with them. And that's, been what I've been trying to work with over time. Just I've approached them and listen to what some of their concerns are and their worries. And then, putting a little bit of pressure on the fact that, there's a lot of concerns from the community, and we want to solve a problem, and we're here to help you solve a problem.
If they don't agree, do you
Right.
you can't?
Personally, no. I can't go and say, I have to come in, right? I'm going to put this in and I'm going to force you to do it. From the conversation that I've had so far, some were a little more worried. Some seemed a lot more receptive and more open and say, I think we need to go. This is their own words. Say we need to be good neighbors. And my family also lives here, and I'm also concerned about my own family. And so I'd like to know as much as possible. And I think we're at the point where if they start realizing that there is a problem, it has to be addressed. We can't just, keep forgetting about it or just pretending it doesn't exist,
Yes.
right?
So you're fairly confident that you're going to be able to convince them that this is a good thing for the neighbors and for their own workers.
Yeah, so I think that the key there for this to be successful is that if I was to go to just one farmer and say, I'm going to come and put 10 instruments on your farm, he's going to say, I'm not feeling too comfortable with this, because then I'm going to be blamed as being the only one that is causing all this problem. But with the help of the AMI, that's who can really put all of them together and say, we need to address this. It's a problem, and let's all do it together. And and nobody's gonna get individually blamed and say it's only you. It's gonna be a common problem, and we're gonna try to find a solution that would work, across the board to try and lower these emissions.
Very successful.
Yeah, and so I'm confident. I think, I believe in people, and I think that, even though, you may think, that it's like the enemy right now, right? The bad people are causing all this problem. In reality, I think that there's good in people, right? That I think that there's interest in addressing a problem. And unfortunately, a lot of times it takes a problem to really start getting things going, right? You need to get to the point where it's becoming a problem before more resources are put into addressing it, because otherwise our attention is on other things, or either saving money or maybe trying to keep costs down, right? So the question has been a lot, why has it been taking so long? Why have we waited so long? I had the same question too. When I moved in the area, I had no idea. I moved here 8 years ago. I don't live in this area, but I live close to Westchester. And I had no idea. The realtor that was helping us look at houses started bringing up, the question, based on some houses, we say, oh, this is more in an area where there's more of the odors. And so we started asking, what odors are you talking about? And then, so as we lived here long enough and met a lot of people that live in the area, I was surprised that actually there were no studies done on the air quality. I thought, why hasn't anybody actually looked at this? And why is there so little data collected on this? So it's happening now. And so we're getting this going. And I think that we can hope that the farmers will be open to collaborate. There's a lot of them, so I think that we can find 10 of them. There may be some that won't be willing to let us go in, and that's okay. I think that we can find 10, and I think that if it's more of a group effort, they'll be more willing to say, we're okay with that. We have our own data. You bring your own data. We can compare it at the same time. We can keep the two things separate. As independent. We're not going to be paid by the farmers or by anybody else.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Mike Tarsillo. I live in Twin Bridges, Landenberg. I have an acronym over here. It's called MFEMPS, the Mushroom Farm Environmental Management Plan. I got a few questions on that because I think one of the objectives of your study is to basically update that plan, right, from the existing plan that we have. Is that plan public, the existing plan that we can take a look at? Is somehow I can resource that so I can?
So you're talking about the best practices in.
Was updated, I think it was originally done in 2012. It was updated in 2016. And while it's not the same as a law or an act or a bill, what it does allow the farms to do is to then go ahead and spread their spent mushroom compost and share that with other farmers. So that is a de facto enforcement situation, and that's why it was done as a best management practices, because as you all know, there's a lot of mushroom compost that's produced, right? And for that to be able to be responsibly conveyed to all of the different row crop farmers and pastures that then use it for their, soil regenerative properties and as a replacement for more harsh fertilizers, that's only allowable if the best management practices are being followed. So again, it's not a law, it's not a regulation, but it's a very, 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 important method of making sure that those practices are followed, so that then the spent mushroom compost is allowed to be responsibly purveyed. If they're not being followed, can't do it.
So it's not specific to each farm, it's just a general type environmental
So
plan.
the conservation districts are the ones that are responsible for going out and making sure that each farm is adhering to their best management practices. So it is, it's something that's monitored, and each farm's, plan is probably different based on the way their farm is set up. And again, not every farm composts for themselves. So a lot of the farms are receiving.
Yeah,
Yeah.
understood.
But so that's where you have this, you know, for lack of a better word, incentive, big incentive, is to follow those best management practices. So they are real and they mean a lot.
So this would cover basically not only H2S type concerns, but also water concerns, as well as perhaps noise and in terms of how the mushroom farms
I mean, right now,
operate.
water is regulated in several different ways. It's, you know, their townships have to meet their MS4s. The EPA monitors water quality. If a farm or a packing facility has a EPA permit, it's measured that. So water has several different ways of being monitored. The best management practices really focus on runoff and making sure that there isn't runoff directly going into the watershed.
So we can Google it and, excuse me, take a look at it.
Yeah.
And then we can compare basically like when your study is done and you've updated the plan, right? We could
Yeah, so
contrast.
I can't personally update the plan, but what I can do is make recommendations on how it could be updated, right? So based on our findings, we could say, you know, we found that the problem is here. And then, you know, a lot of the questions that you have, unfortunately, are for the regulators, who makes the laws and who makes the regulations, who decides how a farm is regulated, why is it regulated differently than other industries? You know, unfortunately, those are questions for legislators. I guess that would be the right word.
That process has is you have the Department of Agriculture that says, look, you know, we're the ones who are agreeing to your best management practices. And because of that, you know, we're going to bring you around the table and we're going to explore, you know, what, let's say we get into some solutions, it would be, here's what we think needs to be done. Here's what we think needs to be adopted. And then, you know, there has to be a review of what does that look like operationally, and it has to be something that then the conservation district person, right? These are people who have to have a document in front of them that they can go out to the farms and it makes sense between what they're seeing at the farm and, you know, what's in the documents. It's a very real process. It involves, you know, again, the growers coming around the table, Department of Agriculture saying, look, this is going to be something that we need to institute as part of your best management practices. And then the conservation district has to say, that makes sense. That's something that we can look at and that we can measure and monitor.
See, I'm
So-
interested in quantitation, you know, basically, what does success look like in terms of what we're trying to do here?
And the conservation district currently, you know, they have stream monitors. They have, that's their runoff and their watershed, the way they monitor that. And the best management practices is really making sure that the correct equipment and the correct construction of the farms is in place to mitigate a lot of that runoff and water holding. For example, the water tanks, there are a lot of challenges because we're having, you know, 5, 10, 20-year rainfall events almost every year now. But they know how to structure it so that it is something real and something that can be monitored. Again, all of that is if, you know, there is a solution that everybody thinks, you know, will work and can really mitigate.
One other comment, I mean, in terms of H2S removal, take a look at the catalyst industry. H2S poisons catalyst. And they've been very effective at removing H2S from different airstreams. You may want to take a look at that. I spent a number of years developing sorbents. I was actually quite interested in the TARP with the, sounds like activated carbon and a non-woven. So if you have any information on that, I can stop by and talk to you.
Yeah, I don't know the manufacturer of the tarp, but we talked to lots of people who, you know, do that for a living. Some of them even wanted to capture the hydrogen sulfide and make it into pellets and do all sorts of stuff with it. So it was interesting to learn that, you know, this is something that you know, that there are people who know enough to hopefully get us where we need to be in terms of mitigation.
I spent a number of years doing direct air capture for CO2, making sorbents. I sent you a LinkedIn, by the way, so if you, please accept my invitation.
I hate microphones. Hi, my name is Deb Schupa. I live over in Landenberg Hunt for an original residence. I've been there over for 30 years. I've got a comment and then I've got two questions. One, I must say, I was at the March meeting, and while I was very offended there with the don't go out on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I was offended tonight. I don't think I'm the only one. Wear a mask. I'm sorry. That just wasn't called for. I believe at the beginning of the meeting, you mentioned that there was a meeting held with members of the mushroom industry. I'm assuming they're some of the farmers in the area. Can you elaborate on that and what was said? Do they understand there is a problem? Are they like, and I'm not going to use the right technical terms, but, ooh, there's a problem, we're doing studies, but ooh, what if we did this, this, and this? We can start to attack it now while we're waiting for these steps. Like, how did that turn out? What's their take on it? What's going on?
Yeah, so I mean, it was introductory meeting just to let them know, who I am and what we've been doing with the pilot study, and just kind of trying to establish some trust in the fact that the goal is to help solve a problem and to tell them there is a problem. We found that we think that there is a problem. I started showing them some of the preliminary data that we had as we were analyzing at that point, and then just tell them this is what I think that the next step should be. I think that ideally now what we would do is try and find where the problem is. And some of that, as I've expressed, we think that we know where the sources are. And I agree with that. The person that would know the best would be the people that are actually involved in the whole process and in doing it. So the farmers. So overall, it was a preliminary introductory meeting where I told them what I thought that the study where it was going, and then what would be the next steps to take. And then they said, we want to start discussing this and talking about what should work out and what we could do next. I'm sorry about offending you with the mask comment.
Like, we live here.
No, and I totally understand, right? Right. And it's not, it's the reality of how, there's really only so many things that a person can do when you live here and that's your home. I mean, when I think about my home, I think about as the safe place where I want to go and just be okay and not have to worry about maybe even my home is unhealthy. And so then there's really so many things that one can do if it doesn't feel healthy in their home. And it's either I guess the EP said you leave the area or you stay indoors. But if you feel like inside the home, then the air quality is not clean, then the only other thing that one can do is put on a respirator to try and filter it out, and to trying to block that air from entering my lungs. Now, again, it doesn't necessarily mean that because you're smelling inside the house, it is unhealthy, right? The comment was really related to the fact that there's only so many things that a person can do in their own house.
Well, like the last meeting, it was, oh, don't take your kids out on Tuesdays and Thursday
Right.
mornings between 8.
Yeah, then, all right, you should be angry, right? Because you want to be able to do those things and you should be able to do those things.
So you said when you had the meeting with the mushroom workers, you were telling them there was a problem. Did they recognize there was a problem? Or is this like, oh, I didn't know there was a problem? Like, and maybe, I'm not sure who that should be directed to.
My sense was that, they were interested in seeing the data and they were interested in learning more about it. And, many of them said, we will be probably logging in and watching the presentation when you give it so that we can learn more about this and then continue this conversation. So the sense was that, let's hear more about it and see where this goes.
Recognize that there was a problem.
I don't know. I mean, maybe that I don't really recall any specifics on that. I don't know if.
Yeah, I mean, the reason we have the pilot that we have is also to figure out what levels there are, how we can mitigate them, and if that mitigation ends up being, effective. So, in terms of saying there's a problem, there's not a problem, if the residents in the community are uncomfortable with the mushroom farms, and if there are health concerns, I mean, that problem has to be defined in order for there to be an appropriate reaction and response. So I think everybody can agree that this, this concern would be a problem. The question is, how do we define the concern so that it's actionable? And that's why, we're trying to do as much as we can as an industry to react right away. And, to provide a little context, it's day in, day out that any ag industry, including mushrooms, have food safety inspections. The packing houses have food safety, worker safety, all of the haulers have their own safety systems. Day in, day out, the only way you operate these businesses that are so, equipment and physical and food related is by focusing on that safety. So, the industry is more used to processes that take a longer time to roll out and to be proved. So often USDA or FDA want to investigate, whether packaging can be changed and can be more sustainable. They want to investigate whether farms overall can be more sustainable. All of those things then lead into food safety issues. Well, how do you change things up but make sure that everything is still safe? So there is a sense of urgency to make sure that we understand what the problem is. And if the problem is such that we have to mitigate it every single day, just like we would with food safety or worker safety, how do we do that? It's just, we understand that those things are usually a longer timeline. Because the problems take time to be defined. So it's frustrating for everybody because the question is, what's the what and what do we have to do to address it? And that's where, with Dr. Sina and, getting enough people around the table, anonymizing information so that the information can be independent and, can be shared in a way that's credible is important as well. So there's absolute recognition that, urgently this is something that can be addressed. It's just that defining the problem before we get to that point.
And I understand it takes time. I worked in corporate America my entire career. I get that. Trust me. It's like, we could have solved this 2 years ago. Why are we still pulling data? So no disrespect.
Yeah.
But my question was, which I'm not really sure if I heard an answer, and if I did, I apologize. Did they recognize there was a problem, or it's like, what do you mean? I've been doing this for 3 years. I didn't know there was a problem. That
Well,
was,
yeah,
guess,
so I was there, and what I'm saying is
they
there's,
did recognize, oh yeah, we've had this going on for a long time.
what I'm saying is they asked Dr. Sina, we'd like to see your data. So at that time, we didn't receive this full presentation from Dr. Sina. So they said, well, we'd like to see what you present in August, and then we can come around the table again. So there wasn't something to react and, respond to.
Okay, that didn't answer my question, but that's all right. My last question was, and I'm going to actually defer this to Ron. I know you're not going to give us the farm where this is going to be done.
Right.
At the last meeting, one of the comments came up that another township within Chester County is doing something totally different with their mushrooms and their composting with the cover, I'm gonna say the wrong words. So that's my concern is I just hope that we're not gonna be testing at some place that isn't going to see the numbers that we're seeing behind us. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, this location is explicitly chosen to replicate the situations that are currently an issue with.
And that's my only concern is
Yeah.
because I know that there are some areas in Chester County that the mushroom farms are there and you never smell a thing. So it's,
Yeah, no,
and this
it's
is the
not that.
compost, not a farm. So there's a big difference between the two.
Yeah, you also have to realize that there is value in also that data, because if someone has implemented a system that works, it's good to know. And it's good for them to know that the money that they put forward is actually fruitful and is helping. So in my case, with my 10 instruments, I would love to also place some for comparison in farms that have made the implementation. And they should be interested in say, you would love for you to come and put it here because we would love to demonstrate that it works so that, the money that we spent is helping. And then, it can help the public feel more reassured about with the fact that we're doing something. So I think there is value in that. And, my role as a researcher is to understand that and to make sure that when I present the data, this data is low because this one was different than the other farms, because this one has a different process, right? So we wouldn't just blindly go in and just say, oh yeah, look, we put 10 monitors around this farm and it looks really good. And that's the one farm that did the implementation, right? Right.
Wherever you put, you're not
So-
doing it one of these that you're not gonna find the numbers, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
I used to be the CFO of Ray Systems when it was an independent company. And I can tell you that most people that pollute are smart enough to put instruments in place. We sold a lot of instruments to companies voluntarily installing gear that measured chemicals. There's no surprise there. Secondly, your comment about the mushroom farm management plans, Laurel Valley this year in February sprayed the fields up here until the water came down Pelham Drive. They know they're not supposed to do that. 2 years ago, they did the same thing. You know what the DEP did? Exactly nothing. Exactly nothing. Those mushroom farm management plans are a sham. For the legislatures, there's a guy named Carl Diamond, odor coordinator. Carl, 30-year veteran of the DEP and the Department of Agriculture, will tell you that if it's a concentrated animal operation, they can stop the odor. Somehow, the legislature, he says, concocted this law such that they can't touch poop when it moves from a concentrated animal operation to a mushroom farm. That's ridiculous. That says that the Mushroom Institute has somehow gotten outside of the scope of these people. Carl Diamond would willingly help him in odor control if he could. If you try it out in field one, concentrated animal operation about 6 miles past Route 1, out shoulder to shoulder, no smell. I go by there frequently, early in the morning, and the air is dead. I can tell that. No odor. Thank you, Paul.
All right. Let's cut the chase. All right. We all know what's going on here. Yes, it's a health issue because I am crazy right now. I am insane. All right. My question is to the township officials. I have your little write out of what the area should be doing. Such activities will be conducted between the hours of 7 a.m. and sunset. They're hiring it, and your day is at 6 o'clock in the morning. Wow. I want that job if I don't have to work for an hour. The establishment maintenance carrying, you know what? Carrying on or permitting of any activity which is dangerous, injurious, offensive, or damaging to the properties of others, or prevents the reasonable use, comfort, or enjoyment. Have you not heard enough of our complaints that we can't stay outside? Reasonable use? It's absolutely offensive. And it's damaging. Okay, I do want to apologize for one thing. I misquoted myself at the March meeting. I'm sorry. I said I had 8 units since I moved in. Well, back then it was 7, but I just had it replaced. So now I am at number 8. Okay. I have now spent more money in heat pumps than I originally spent on my home. What is going to be done?
Agreed. Isn't the Pennsylvania Constitution guarantees clean air and water? The governor just recently said we deserve clean air and clean water. So what gives the mushrooms people the right to invade our airspace? Like air we're breathing. And I can't see again why we have to go to any further studies, and all that does is spend more money and waste more time. He's already come to the conclusion it's not good. Something has to stop now. Oh, we need more people to put more money into our homes, our health. It's ridiculous. And as far as he said, I called when they were running that runoff. The answer was, we're going to allow them to let the sprinklers go during spring. I said, well, it's not spring. It's 3 weeks from spring. This is the kind of, they qualify what they want for their own needs. It's 60 degrees today. It doesn't mean the frost level is going to go away today. This is winter. You've still got 3 weeks towards spring. We've been putting up a lot of BS. And enough of it's enough. It's time to get your feet on the ground, start pounding and do something for the people. The excuse when I came here, we were here first. But doesn't give them a right to destroy my air, my home, and my leisure of my home. We're tired of it. We all are. Putting in the kind of money she just said into air, into heat pumps and air conditioners.
Among other things.
Official monies haven't quoted. For what? When the average person gets 15 out of a heat pump and 25 out of an air conditioner. And you guys sit back and say, well, aren't you satisfied with this figure? I wasn't satisfied with state figures, but I put, listen to them. This figure quantifies the whole thing as far as I'm concerned. And another 9 months, and all that does is give you guys time to drag your feet. Nothing.
And as far as friendliness of the mushroom farmers, and I'm adding in the composting people in this, I actually called one of the general managers of a farm, and I asked him if he would like to buy my home. I said, I will sell it to you for $100. And he laughed at me. I said, I'm dead serious.
You know, if these people ask for reimbursement, what they put in their homes, you start taking action real quick in a program. Because they put more money in these houses for unnecessary maintenance that these people have provided for us. We have to do their maintenance because they won't do what's right to keep the air clean. We're paying to keep them in business. Their bottom line doesn't get affected, but ours does. You can sit there again, go with your 9-month study and drag your feet. As I said, studies only create more money for people. It just drags on and on. That's the trouble with government. I say Pennsylvania, the governor Shapiro should be made aware of what's going on right now. He should get the report from the professor. And he should start seeing, coming down here, his wife visited. I read where his wife visited a mushroom farm. She was very enamored by it. But she didn't see the other side of it. Maybe he should see it. What do you think?
So what as the board are you going to do now that they are in violation of your code? What's going to happen?
Chris, can you speak to the enforceability of the code and what may or may not occur? If you could just like give us a game out, I assume it would be something of, we would go and try and enforce it, they would sue us, we would lose?
Aw.
So
Yeah, I mean, that's the answer.
The answer is in the acre law.
So local township code, just to kind of provide a summary understanding, it is enforceable up until the point where there's a larger level statute that protects against that ordinance. So that's a legacy ordinance and is essentially kind of as described, it's ineffectual against a larger statute law, which is acre, which protects the actual industry in of itself. So in this matter, it would go through an enforcement violation process. It would go to a local magistrate for a decision because we can't provide citations for monetary fines or anything. So at that magistrate level, ultimately through a lengthy appeals process, dependent upon when you can get a court date through the Court of Common Pleas, that magistrate would dismiss it based off of the higher law.
Have you done this before? So this is all hypothetical.
It's not hypothetical. It's pretty much a process like that will happen.
What we have done also is we've required permits for mushroom houses, and we had to legally return the money for the permits. Because under the acre law, they're exempt for the growing portion of the facility.
Are there any mushroom
So that goes back to the state.
owners, workers, managers? Yeah.
I'm just going to go ahead.
Why? Because the good old boys are at somebody's house smoking some cigars and saying, ha, ha, ha.
And I understand the continuing for comments and commentary, but I just want to make sure that this is still a question and answering session. So if there's another question provided based off of the presentations tonight, we'll continue, but want to make sure that we don't move into more of just an open commentary portion of it.
So
Yeah.
I have a question as well.
What's that?
I have a question as well.
I didn't come to the March meeting, and Mr. Morgan invited me that come here, so I thought I would come here. But it was good information. What I was looking for from the study, we'll get a kind of a map, like you see when earthquake comes or nuclear plants or any of the emergency comes, chemical leaks, all itself. So guys from this area go out, or when when the townships give kind of permission to build something, they say, oh, this area has some issues. So do we have some map like that? I'm not talking about what I have done, but the future generations who come here so that they can make the decision based on good information. Just an example. Thinking about it, you have this kids park, children park next to you. It's kind of low level.
I'm sorry, I actually can't really understand you very well right now.
Okay,
I don't
what
know if
I'm
it's the
saying is
microphone echoes and stuff, but
this the playground for the children. So what is the level of this hydrogen sulfide there in the park? Okay, at the same point, if we are from the mushroom industry, they should be working with these instrument manufacturer guys, just like we have in the homes. There's a radon issue. They say, okay, put a fan or something. It helps eliminate that. And maybe there is something which people have a chronic disease, some kind of gadget or something, which you place it, it can help solve that problem. And if we are not looking into any solutions, all that data is going to be data here, data there, data there. It's not going to go anywhere. I've seen it over and over again. So are we making a map from here within 1 mile, nothing will be built because there is a hydrogen sulfide issue? That's
developing a map, and that's not the role that we play. That would be a better question for.
I think that's not the health expert. That's for the industry. They have a kind of alarm or something says, we release, guys, shut your windows or go inside.
Making a map like that for outdoors is complicated because you don't always have the same conditions outdoors, unfortunately, because it really is depending on what is the atmospheric pressure, where is the wind blowing.
Correct.
So, I could try and put 100 instruments and then get today's situation and the readings and say the concentration is high here, but maybe tomorrow it will be high over there. So it would be complicated. It's not impossible. It would take a lot of resources. And I think probably right now, it's better to put the resources towards, can we just lower the emissions? So if you try to work at the source, it's a lot better than try to work, once the emissions are spread out, right? Now you kind of like lost control of them. They're controllable at the source. So my opinion is that if we can try to fix the problem at the source, we're going to be way better off than putting resources towards, let's find out, where everything is going, because at that point it's kind of lost out there, right? It's kind of like saying that go and get your car emissions back into your car. It's complicated. You can't get tweezers and get all those particulate from your car back inside your car. But what we can do is make this information public. And so our goal is to publish our research so that it can be found, just like we've done a little research and trying to see, has anyone else looked into this problem in this area and what have they found? By publishing that information, it can be available and people can see what the findings of our study were and where the concentrations, where they were elevated and so forth.
Yeah, it seems, I think what I understood so far seems complicated to implement anything if there is no legislation process on enforcement on these farms. Like on the industry chemical, we have any release, we submit the data. How many hours, how many minutes that went, and what's the cloud? I remember years ago, we used to use a Safer, was a software, which will kind of tell. And even we want to expand, we have to submit that data to see, okay, what will affect those kind of forests and other things. And I think we are very early stage. Hopefully it may be solved another 100 years. I don't think it's going to happen during my lifetime. Anyway, thank you very much. Thank you for good information.
I just want to be respectful of also people's times, and I don't know if anybody else has any questions, but if you do, I would line up now and we can go ahead and get the remaining ones. If you're the last one, ma'am, then.
Hi, my name is Tina Ayala. I just have one question. For Rachel Roberts, you mentioned that you were using a private consulting firm. Is that correct?
We're using an environmental management services firm.
And you said you could not disclose that this evening because you didn't ask for permission. Was that correct?
Right, I wouldn't do that without asking them and, yeah.
Okay, will that be disclosed to the public?
It depends on if they're comfortable with it or not.
Okay, so how can you assure the public that what you're doing does not have any conflict of interest? If you can't disclose the farm or the firm that you're using?
Well, when we as a trade association get grant funding to do a pilot study, it's really, with the intention of informing, our sector, so Department of Agriculture, who, granted the grant and has seen the design and the study and the methodology. And we'll be taking the data that we get and we'll be sharing it, with certain other folks. Dr. Sina can give his input. We have a Penn State advisor on it. But disclosing the name of a company and a person won't assist in the process. And if there's questions about, who it is or why we chose a certain, contractor, that's not something I can really provide feedback to you about. But we're doing the study specifically so that we can learn and we can share what we learn and that we can try to mitigate something. And that if the mitigation works, we can implement as quickly as we can across as much of the industry as we can. So sharing that information, that's up to them, whether they want to be on the record or not. It's not something we're forced to do. So, that's not part of the process.
But American Mushroom did choose the firm. Is that correct? Do you choose
Yes.
the firm or did someone else?
And Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture has to review the grants. It's a very rigorous review process. And this is a known entity. They've worked with the Conservation District for many years. They've worked with lots of farms in this area, all sorts of different farms. So we chose based on their expertise, their experience, their credibility, And the grant was only awarded after a rigorous process of review by the Department of Agriculture. So we feel really confident that this is.
So the Department of Agriculture had a say in it, not just
Correct.
work for.
Yeah,
Okay.
you apply for the funds, they review, and, you know, if there were questions about that contractor, they certainly would have asked, but this is a well-known, well-respected, independent contractor, and so we expect to get good results. And, you know, everything we're doing is a good faith effort to understand what we can and to implement, you know, what could be a solution, what would be a better result. And if we could wave a magic wand, we would do it today. But, you know, we're just looking at trying to solve the issue.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
All right. I don't know if there's any questions from the
Yeah,
board. I don't know if there's.
Comment first. I want to thank everyone for being patient, and I appreciate the data that was provided. The question I have goes back to the Tuesday and Thursday spikes. And Rachel, if you're listening, the study, the pilot farm, are they going to be looking at spent mushroom substrate as well?
So, no, they're not going to be looking at spent mushroom substrate once it's being, you know, purveyed or applied by other farms. To answer the second part of your question, what was the first part?
So I was just, the Tuesday and Thursday.
Yep.
Just as an observation, as I live here, Tuesdays and Thursdays, there's a lot of rotation in spent compost. The only thing that is done differently, the composting, the fresh compost, the lagoons have aerators, they're daily. That happens every day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. There has to be some correlation to where these spikes are, number one. Number two, the monitors that we have are in close proximity to some of the larger facilities that have spent mushroom substrate. How can we, how can we include this or just take a look at it, please? That's all.
Yeah, and I think with our, you know, the pilot that we're doing, we're trying to capture as much of the operations as we possibly can to understand, you know, again, what baseline is and whether or not we can affect that baseline and get the numbers down. You know, sometimes the more studies you do, the fewer correlations you see. So, you know, like we've said, I think it's just going to take more information over more time to ensure that, you know, that the more data that is available doesn't discount some of what we see as correlations right now or strengthens them. So, you know, it's unknown for us to act on.
Yeah, and so from the outset, from perspective where the monitors are, we don't know what is happening on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So that's why going in and now taking samples closer to the action would be helpful to try and correlate those and see, is there something going on those days? What is the process?
There's a lot of the spent mushroom substrate from the growing part that actually leaves the area now. Thankfully, it just leaves. Trucks come and take it out and use it as fertilizer, but there's also a substantial amount that is brought back to a 1 mile radius of this building. I would say 75% of what is generated is still kept here, and to narrow that down, 50% of it's brought back to essentially the Star Road area.
And there are, Daniel, do you remember, we found a study on spent compost. Was it done in China? Do you remember that? But I know that there have been studies done on spent compost, but not here, just, you know, in other countries. So it is definitely something worth looking into.
Yeah, so, and Rachel, was that part of the West Grove study? Do you know?
Do you mean the 1999?
In 99?
I don't think it was, but I really don't know for sure. I can't recall.
Because they had a heavier concentrated volume of spent in that area as well. in 99. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Thank you for everyone that had questions and came out. We're gonna keep moving forward with this and hopefully you all keep in touch, come to meetings for any additional information. All right, have a good evening. No, we'll just be doing our annual. As things progress, we'll be giving updates at our regular supervisor meetings. If there's something special, we'll obviously advertise it and let everyone know.